Good evening. Welcome to the May 6, 2015 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We have a quorum present, so I'll call the meeting to order. First item on tonight's agenda is to approve the minutes of April 1st, 2015. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? If not, I'll declare them approved as submitted. We have 5 public hearings scheduled for this evening, and I appreciate everybody coming tonight. The first of which is a zoning application for approximately 58.7 acres along Compton Road to be zoned PRD, simultaneous with annexation. Mr. Kevin Estes, on behalf of Green Trails LLC, is the applicant. Mr. Blomley, good evening.
Good evening, Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission. Our first public hearing tonight, as you mentioned, is for a zoning simultaneous with annexation of property along the south side of Compton Road. And if we could pull up the map, it's the area in blue on the map in front of us. As I mentioned, it's along the south side of Compton Road. To the west of the subject property is the Generals Run condo development, which is zoned PRD, the Reserve Subdivision, which is zoned RS15. To the south, RS12. To the south of the subject property are several larger tracts with frontage on Osborne Lane. There are several subdivisions also in the unincorporated county located to the north and to the east of the subject property. You'll recall back in January, on January 7th to be specific, we had a public hearing with regards to this application. The Planning Commission actually had 2 public hearings, one for the annexation of the property and one for the zoning of the property to PRD simultaneous with annexation. The annexation public hearing or the annexation request was approved or recommended for approval. However, it has not moved on to the City Council yet, as the property owner requested that the annexation stay without moving on to the City Council until such time as it could be paired back with the zoning request if the zoning request was recommended for approval to the City Council. So it has not moved on to the City Council. If the Planning Commission recommends approval of the zoning request tonight, then they would move back in tandem to the City Council. When the Planning Commission deferred the zoning request back on January the 7th, the Planning Commission said that if the applicant modifies the program book, no matter what the changes are, and it comes back to the Planning Commission, that it would hold another public hearing on the matter. And typically, if the plan has been reduced in intensity or reduced in density, then typically the Planning Commission would not hold another public hearing at this level. But the motion to defer was made with the condition that when it comes back to the Planning Commission, that we hold another public hearing. So we have scheduled a public hearing for tonight on the revised plan as it has been submitted. Mr. Taylor with SEC made a brief presentation along with Mr. Mulchan from SEC about the revisions that they have made to the pattern book. One of the chief concerns of the public at that public hearing and also of the Planning Commission related to density. In the original proposal, there was a total of 276 units that was before the Planning Commission on January the 7th. That number has been reduced to 250, and the configuration of housing types has been modified as well. Before, there were 11,000 square foot minimum single family lots, 6,000 square foot minimum single family lots, and a what he has termed a cottage element, which would be similar to townhomes or condominiums. And so the numbers of the various product types has changed somewhat among the various product types, and they have added a different product as well, what they're terming the villas, which would be similar to what we would be familiar with as zero lot line attached single family homes. Mr. Taylor proposes some of those zero lot line villas to be fronting on a public street and some of them to be fronting on private streets. The revised plan provides more specificity with regards to the building materials that would be allowed on all of the units. Some of the architectural elevations have been modified as well, and the proposed landscaping package has been added to the, or details on the landscaping along Compton Road has been added to the pattern book. With that being said, without getting into too many of the specific details, I don't want to repeat what Matt Taylor might say in his presentation. He has a PowerPoint presentation detailing the specifics of the project as they have been submitted to the Planning Commission for consideration tonight.
Okay, Mr. Taylor.
Good evening, Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Matthew, for that brief introduction there. I'm Matt Taylor of SEC here in town. I've got Mr. Rob Molson in my office with me as well, and then Mr. Kevin Estes, the applicant, is en route. He is stuck in traffic, as he told me right before I walked in here. So, as Matthew said, we were here in January for the same property. It was a little bit different proposal. We've made some pretty significant changes to some of the buildings, introduced a new type of building, and we hope that you will agree that we've changed it for the better. So I want to start, as Matthew said, we're located along the south side of Compton Road, about 59 acres in size. The property itself right now is pretty open. There's a few trees in the middle, one existing barn up front, and the site generally drains from the reserve side toward the east down to Bear Branch. Bear Branch is where we'll bring our sewer up from, and then we'll get utilities from Compton Road and extend those into the site. We've got a mixture of city and county zoning in the area. It's all residential in nature, and here's an existing structure in the reserve. A picture of the property itself. This was taken at the southwest corner looking northeast. You can see it's fairly open. It's gentle rolling from the reserve side toward that creek. Here's some pictures of the newly constructed townhomes at our northwest corner in the General Runs development. This was the only picture, or only building at the time of the first public hearing, but they've got two more underway at this time. And then that sole structure on site that I talked about. Plan itself, as Matthew said, we've reduced it from 276 down to 250 dwelling units. That gives us a density of about 4.25 units to the acre. Comparison's sake, that Stratford Hall is about 4 units to the acre. Puckett Station's about 3.8. And then Tuscany, which we approved late last year or earlier this year, is about 5 units to the acre, to give you some comparison on some developments you may be familiar with. We are spreading that across essentially 3 different housing types. 101 cottages, which was previously 170. That's about a 40% reduction. 111 single-family detached homes. I think we had about 105 or 106 of those before, so we actually added a couple of single-family lots to the mix. And then we introduced a new housing type, which is the villa, which is the zero lot line that Matthew alluded to, where it's 2 attached to each other. All these homes will be for sale. They're not for rental property. We're proposing all underground utilities, a mixture of public and private streets, and all the homeowners here will be members of the HOA, which will be managed by a third-party management association. And of course, any project this size will have multiple phases. If the zoning is successful, we would intend to start the first phase, which may consist of each of the 3 types of homes, about 120 days after the zoning is complete. First thing is the 6,000 square foot lots. It's internal to development. It's away from the reserve. It's buffered by bigger lots to the west. And this hasn't changed a whole lot since our January meeting. We added about 5 lots. We had 84 before. We're proposing 89 at this time. They are all single-family detached homes. They're 1 and 2 stories. They're a minimum of 1,800 square feet in size, all sodded front yards, all front-loaded garages. The materials are the same as we were here before. They're brick, stone, cement board siding. The only vinyl on these homes will be in the trim and soffit areas. The setbacks are very similar to most of the other developments we're seeing, with front-loaded garages, 35 foot on the front, 5 feet on the side, and 20 feet on the rear. And that provides enough space for 4 cars to park in the garage or park in the driveway outside of the garage. All of our roads in this section are proposed to be public, all underground utilities, sidewalks on both sides. You can see the elevations. Got a lot of roof line change, dormers, decorative garage doors are not just plain white doors. The larger lots, these are lots that are along our western boundary, which directly abut the reserve. They are a minimum of 11,000 square feet in size. The homes are a minimum of 2,200 square feet in size, 1- and 2-story homes, all sodded front yards again here. The garages here will be side and rear entry garages. With those side and rear entry garages, we've requested shallower front setbacks. That way we can pull the home closer to the street. Gives a more intimate feel, really a better feel as you come into the neighborhood on that entry boulevard there. And then the sides will be 5 and 20 on the rear. And same materials, brick, stone, cement board siding. Only vinyl will be in the trim and soffit areas, just like last time. You can see very attractive elevations. Houses are intended to complement the reserve. The minimal square footages are the same. And we've also committed to no wooden or PVC fencing along these lots here. That was at the request of some of the neighbors in the reserve, and we were happy to oblige by that request. The cottages. This seemed to be a lot of the concern and discussion at our last meeting, so we spent a lot of time on this redesign. We pulled the units away from the creek to get them more out of the floodplain. We pulled them away from Compton Road to allow for some room for landscaping and buffering. And then we pulled them closer to our entry boulevard to help complement the other side of the street. Really get that nice streetscape on both sides as you come into the development. In addition to that, we cut the number of them down by over 40%. Density seemed to be a major issue here. And then one of the key things with these cottages are these are an age-targeted project for the 55-plus age range. I think we are seeing more of that. That is a very in-demand, a very needed home offering in our community. We've got an assisted living project going through the Gateway right now. We've got the Tuscany project, which we recently approved. All that was age-targeted, and that's exactly what Goodall Homes, the builder here, wants to continue to do. Goodall has a track record in Middle Tennessee of doing these projects that are age-targeted and being very successful at them. The homes themselves are all one-story. They're a minimum of 1,300 square feet in size. They all have 2-car garages. They'll have very strong landscaping package that comes with this site. And really the rear-loaded garages, you don't see those from the public roads, from Compton. You see them internal to the site. All the roads here will be private for this development. They'll be sold very similar to a townhouse as a horizontal property regime. We've got a strong pedestrian network through here. Each house will have its own garage, have its own driveway big enough for 2 cars, and then we've provided almost another 70 visitor spaces. So we provided an abundance of places for the residents and their guests to park here. Materials here, along Compton and the main boulevard, you'll see very attractive brick, stone, cement board siding. The vinyl, any vinyl is internal to the development. And we'll outline that a little better right here. The units that you see colored in orange, those seem to be a lot of heartburn. What were those going to look like? And so we spent a lot of time, one on design aspects to get them further away from Compton, pulling them closer to our entry boulevard, and then we also upgraded the elevations. This right here is an example of what those would look like. Alternating materials on a consistent basis. Moving a lot of different roof lines. This is a very high quality project that Goodall has built in some of their more higher end neighborhoods over in the Sumner County area. The rear, which is what you see red to red, internal there, be that side. So you don't see that from Compton or the main boulevard coming into the development. And then we had discussed a lot about the garage side. We probably did a poor representation of what that garage side would look like at the first meeting. And so we got a better picture. I want to portray more what we're doing. We're pulling the units off of the private roads, providing ample garage and driveway space. Doing muted colors on the garage door. They're not stark white. They're going to be more of a tannish color. They're architectural doors. They're not that bland, just blank white door. And then you've got that green up there that's going to provide room for trees, shrubs, landscaping to really help break up those roads, even on the garage side of these units. And then the one thing we didn't have last time that we introduced now was the villas. The closest thing I can think of in town to mimic these toward would be some of the houses that Decker and Belt built over off St. Andrews. They're a duplex, 2 units attached, all high quality materials. They're 1 and 2 stories again, a minimum of 1,500 square feet in size. Again, the units here will have a heavy landscaping package that goes with these, be maintained by the HOA. Decorative garage doors again. Same quality materials that we've discussed throughout. The only vinyl you'll see here is in the trim and soffit areas. Here's an example front elevation. You can see it is a front-loaded building, but it's an architectural door. It's pulled back from the front. It becomes more of an architectural feature than anything else. The rear provides for a nice patio, seating area. And this, again, is more geared toward that 55 plus. It's just a different buyer. Somebody wants a little bit bigger house, doesn't want a neighbor on both sides. Amenities. The biggest amenity we have is we're providing and dedicating over a fifth, just over 20% of our land to open space, whether that be through detention, walking trails, unimproved areas, landscaping, berms, something that's not going to be on somebody's lot or paved or built on. We also provide an abundance of pedestrian activities through sidewalks as well as walking trails down along the creek. And all that connects back to our strongest structural amenity, which is located at the clubhouse in the middle of these cottages. That's also flanked by a community garden, which is very attractive, has been very appealing and successful in other communities that Goodall has done with this same age target. The clubhouse has strong architecture, provides an abundance of gathering areas, grilling areas, just places to relax and hang out for the residents of this neighborhood. And then, of course, we'll provide entry signage onto Compton, and again, some lower key signage into our cottage entrances. Access, our main access points are all the same as the original plan. We have one primary access point on Compton where we'll construct right and left turn lanes identical or very close to what the reserve built for their development. We'll still have the secondary entrance into the reserve, and then 2 stubs to the south for some future connection back to Osborne as those properties develop. And our road sections are very standard for what we see here in Murfreesboro and development within the city. Landscaping, we spent a lot more time developing a plan on the landscaping. We have pulled those units, doubled the space between the road and what those units along Compton have. We've got 80 feet between the existing right-of-way in those units and 100 feet between the existing pavement in those units. We've committed to a berm as well as a walkway and heavy landscaping along Compton. I think a lot of the neighbors liked the landscaping they saw along the reserve, so we'll try to mimic that and add some seasonal color. Have strong landscaping presence at the entry features as well, and continue that throughout the site. Each building will have nice landscaping at its base, a lot of trees along the street, as well as along the garage side as well. And lastly, Matthew hit on all the items, I believe, that we heard at the first neighborhood meeting, which was the density, which we've reduced by about 10% overall, and reduced the cottage density number by over 40%. I feel like we've clarified and improved the elevations and appearance of the units, especially from Compton and the main entry boulevards. And then there was also a lot of questions about how we were going to impact Bear Branch from a water quality as well as a flooding standpoint. We were committed then, we remain committed to abiding by all the city's regulations to not increase runoff and flooding of Bear Branch. And then last thing I think I heard there was the connection to the reserve. We've met with city staff multiple times in regards to this project as a whole, had several conversations about that stub, and city staff wants to see that connection remain and continue the long-standing practice they have had to make those connections. So we have left that on the plan, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Taylor at this time? Thank you, Mr. Taylor. That's from the Planning Commission, sir. You'll have the chance to speak in just a second. Okay, if there's no questions from the Planning Commission, before I open the public hearing, let me briefly go over the rules we conduct our meetings by here. When we open the public hearing, you'll be invited, anybody will be invited to come to the microphone. Please state your name, give your address, if you would, for the record, and make your comments to the microphone. If you would, make all your comments to the Planning Commission. If you have questions, the staff will make a note of your questions, and we'll attempt to get those questions answered at the conclusion of the public hearing. We have quite a few people here tonight, and we have 4 other public hearings to conduct tonight, so we will be observing the 3-minute time limit. So please keep your comments concise and to the point, if you would, and so everybody will have a chance to speak, and we want everybody to certainly come up that'd like to come up. All that being said, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak on this matter.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Thank you for having us here tonight. First thing I'd like to address is the folks here in the reserve. If you just raise your hands, show your solidarity here, letting you know that we are concerned as a group. And I will turn this.
Yes, sir. I know we met before the meeting, but if you state your name and address, please.
I'm sorry, Philip Umbarger, 3222 Fallcroft Drive. Does this work?
I'm sorry, say again.
Repeat that again.
I'm sorry, Philip Umbarger at 3222 Fallcroft Drive. That's in the reserve community. 3 things, and I apologize, I'm going to fly through this very quickly. The few things that we're concerned with: density design, increased traffic and congestion, environmental and water flow concerns. First of all, density. That's the first proposal. As you can see, that is the second proposal, and there's a tremendous amount of folks that are going to be moving in there. In fact, yesterday somebody said to me, well, where does the school go? And I said, well, that's a problem because we already have 241 apartments on one side and 65 duplexes on the other, so that's already 300 units, and we're adding 250 more. Just as I said, the pool has been removed so they can add more places. We decrease uniformity, so we have more variation in places to live that do not match the area. And again, we're reducing the resources available: schools, fire, police, and sanitation. The school overcrowding problem, we already have flat tops at Siegel and at Oakland. And we have an initiative here in Murfreesboro to bring Class A commercial real estate space. And if we're targeting 55 and over, this does not meet that qualification. People are going to be looking for single-family units. Design, as you see, the homes proposed to be offered in this development will complement and continue the quality of the development exhibited in the surrounding neighborhoods. This doesn't meet that. That's very obvious to me. I realize that the drawings he put out there look better, but pictures are truth. There's a picture of the reserve. There's a picture on the reserve to the right. That's one of their neighborhoods on the left. Duplexes like they're proposing on the left, reserve on the right. As proposed, the only multi-user community in the area, would be the only multi-user community in the area. It doesn't complement the quality of the surrounding areas. This type of development is usually utilized as fill, and we can see that over on Middle Tennessee Boulevard between the commercial businesses there. So, that's where we mostly see things like this, so they can get the maximum density. And if you'll notice on the plan, there's upgrade elevations around the outside. So what we see on the outside is not what we're going to be seeing on the inside. And he showed us pictures of the better ones, but he did not show us the pictures of the inside. Very concerning. Traffic concerns, as you see, these are the roads in the reserve. Without a welt fence, we're not going to be able to support. Those traffic barrels were put there by the city because we've had 3 incidences in the last 3 months. One of them, a car hit one of those manholes, both airbags popped out and broke the man's hand. It broke their windshield too. We lost 2 other oil pans, and the city has been called, and this can be verified through the police department. We cannot support the traffic in the reserve, and I'll move faster. I apologize. Bear Creek will be covered by someone else. I apologize very quickly. I'm trying to keep to my minutes here. There it is. Okay. I want to show you very quickly, this right here is the floodplain. Right there, that's the 100-year floodplain. If we build around this, we already know we have a flood problem with that creek, and we build around this, we're going to put more water in there. And just as it shows on there, there's duplexes, multifamily units. This is what happens when you build in the floodplain. We do not need to have a disaster like this in Murfreesboro. In conclusion, based on the presented information regarding density design, increased traffic flow and congestion, and the environmental water concerns, we, the residents of the reserve, respectfully request that the proposal be denied. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Good job.
Thank you.
Who would like to be next?
Oh, gosh.
Good. Hi, I'm Beth Brown, 833 Compton Road, and we live on a family farm. My dad's here with me and my sister, and we are going to be the ones that mostly are going to get the water runoff. And I just want to refer you back to the report that the city of Murfreesboro paid for. So we all paid for this, and I'm wondering, it's on the impaired waterways, this stream that's coming into, that comes down our farm, and is all this water, all these impervious structures, it's just going to get the water. You've got detention ponds. I get that. The water's going to get into that detention pond, stay there, and then it's going to continue to come down our creek and just continue to flood us. And I kind of want to refer you back to what we talked about in January. We talked about the traffic, and I know Rom said something about that Matt forwarded a traffic study. It's been submitted, but Rom states, there is a need for roadway improvements to Compton Road, and that's now. And we've got new apartments on Memorial, new condos in General's Run. If you add this, it's about 1,000 more cars coming down through there every day. So 2-lane road, we know, I think Tom Clark had asked the question about the state of Tennessee and widening Compton Road because it's a state highway. That's 20, 30 years out is what I heard. If I'm wrong, correct me. This is just, if you look at the surrounding neighborhoods, I've highlighted 13 neighborhoods around what's coming in. It's all RS-12. It's RS-10. It's RS-15. There's very little RS-10. Even the county subdivisions that are surrounding this are ours. There's 13 neighborhoods around this. And we're going to put 4.25 density. It doesn't fit. Veterans Parkway, nice 4-lane road. This is a great fit for that area. You've already got the infrastructure for that many more vehicles coming through. I think somebody else said there's a lot of cottages, and we talked about the density and changing that. And I don't know, Matthew, if you've run the numbers, but have you physically counted every house and cottage and zero lot line on that plat? Because we did. We care that much, and we physically have counted. And my density numbers, I think you guys asked them to reduce density. And if you ask somebody to reduce density in an area that's already RS 12, 15, I would think you would want to get it pretty far down there, 2 to 3 an acre, 4.25. And what we're getting is not exactly lining up with that. We're getting that the density has not been reduced as much as, not even close to what we would like to get down to. Let's see if I can think of anything else. I think that was it. I don't want to take up too much time. But we've scrubbed it. We've looked at it. We've read it. You know, we've taken Matt's new proposal, and I think we have a strong case. I think that we deserve that to this. You know, you deferred it, which was awesome because he had a chance to come back and reduce the density. Did he do that? Are you satisfied? I'm saying deny it.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Ms. Brown. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Roger Howard Lufkin, 775 Compton Road. I don't want to repeat a lot, but my main concern is the water. And like I stated the first time, when we had the main May flood, it come within 15 feet of the house. So I'm afraid if I get any more now, especially with the density and everything that they're going to put across the road, I'm just figuring I'm going to get flooded. So I don't want to take up your time, but thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Who's next?
Ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Commission, I'm County Commissioner David Nipper. I represent this district. Let me say that that is a lot of houses to be putting in an area so small. Many of the concerns that they have tonight are valid, but let me say that I think we need to put a lot of infrastructure in place before we put a lot more cars going down this road. If you come down through there during the mornings or afternoons, Siegel can back you up all the way to the intersection. Memorial is full. Compton Road is beginning to back up continuously. But let me take you back a few years. How could you get, if you had to get everybody out of that area quickly due to tornadoes that came through that area, what would happen to the emergency equipment trying to get in there to save lives when you've got 250 units, that's at least 500 cars, maybe more, trying to get out of there or trying to get in there to their loved ones? Right now, the infrastructure is not there to handle it. I asked you to deny this and give it some time, give the community some time to build properly before we put this many homes and this many vehicles on the road there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nipper. Anybody else?
Hello, my name is Hugh Jones. I reside at 1917 Baskin Brook Court. That's in Garrison Cove Subdivision. I'm speaking on behalf of my mother who can't be here. She resides at 824 Compton Road. That's a 5-acre parcel that adjoins this proposal. It's where Bear Branch actually crosses onto her property and then passes underneath Compton Road. First, I'd like to thank the Commission for holding a public meeting again and public hearing, so thank you very much. In the developer's own vision statement in the second proposal, they actually used some language to the effect of it's harmonious and enhancing to the surrounding areas. As the first slide that was presented this evening showed, and Ms. Brown showed also, that all the surrounding areas have much bigger footprints for their lots. And I would say that that is pretty counterintuitive to their proposal and in their vision statement of being harmonious and enhancing to the surrounding developments and subdivisions. At the January meeting, what I believe the public that came to speak on this matter heard from the commissioners was that go back and take a look at this. Density is a huge concern. From my paradigm and maybe the others, that meant let's take a look at what this whole thing looks like. From what we saw in the second proposal, they did change some density, but just by about 26 doors. It's still effectively, in our opinion and mine, the same exact layout, very high density. I would like to pose a question, because this is out of my wheelhouse to calculate these types of things, but how you calculate the density, does that include all of the green space and the retention areas, the creek proper, a bare branch, and the green area to the east of that? I don't know. Do you include that when you do the density? So I'll just pose that to the Commission to look at that right there. Also, with the dense development, the General's Run is there in that area already. I kind of feel like that Compton Road in that area, General's Run might be serving that need and sort of done its tour of duty for that area. And also with the single-family homes at the back of the property, they were listed at 6,000 square feet minimum. And I know that the gentleman has said that they've added 5 more lots into that area, so I don't know if that's made the lots actually smaller, but some more have actually looked like been crammed in there. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much for having a public hearing and hearing our concerns about this area and this development.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Anybody else?
Good evening, members of the Commission. My name's Stan Vaught. I live at 6675 West Trimble Road in Milton. Somewhat far away from this, but to give you a different perspective, maybe from somebody like me that lives 10 miles away from it, Compton Road has been one of our major thoroughfares in the county for years, and it's one way that a lot of people from the Lascassas Milton community have been able to navigate around Murfreesboro, especially when the construction was going on with Northfield Boulevard and those kinds of things. And so if you create a development here that's got this type of density, you're not only going to impact the people that live directly across the road from it, the people adjacent to it, the neighborhoods there, but you're going to reach far and wide, basically the northwest quadrant of our county. Even all the way over to Kittrell. So I ask you to really consider that density and the number. I'm all for anybody developing their property. Most of y'all know me. You know my background. I am a personal property owner's rights advocate. In fact, my niece is going to be an attorney with that in mind to defend property owners' rights. And I believe these people are entitled to develop their property. But I also believe that the Planning Commission and the City Council and the Rutherford County Commission and the County Planning Commission years ago established a benchmark, 20,000 square foot lots in the county. It was always 15,000 square foot lots in the city when property was annexed. There has been some deviation from that over the years for various reasons, and I understand that. But my belief here is that the best this should be is considered a RS-15 development. Meadowood was developed that way. Most of y'all know that FF&J Ventures did that years ago. Howard Wall did Hawks Ridge. I can name every developer, much like most of you can, that has done every subdivision in that general area out there. Johnny Wilson
They all developed on that RS-12, RS-15 scheme, with the exception of General's Run right there. And honestly, I would have been down here if I had seen the sign for General's Run. Obviously, it met on bad times there, or the timing was bad on it. But I ask you to consider that this is, you're on the edge of the country. You're on the edge of the county right here. This type of development, it's a good-looking development. I'm sure Goodall Homes does an excellent job. Every subdivision I've ever been in that they've done, they've made an excellent product. It's just the wrong density in the wrong area. If it was on I-24, if it was right on Veterans Parkway somewhere, it would be fine. But on Compton Road, a two-lane road, I know it is part of the major thoroughfare plan for the county for years to come, but honestly, most of us will not be here when it ever gets to be four-laned. So with that said, I'm going to conclude. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Vaught. Anybody else?
Good evening, Chairman and Planning Commissioners. Thank you very much for having us. My name is William Berry. My wife and I live at 744 Stone Mill Circle, and we're probably your newest voting constituents. When my wife and I moved from Brentwood to Murfreesboro in 2003, we bought in Broadlands, and this is relevant to my point. All but 3 lots were built on. We could easily see the lot sizes, front, backyards. On the right, as you come in Broadlands, there's a heavy high fences, trees. It's all back to the subdivision. Homes are a little smaller, and as was the lots, but they were nice. It was well kept. We knew what was over there. At the end of the street in Broadlands, there's a lake behind the houses. On the right-hand side, there's a field because of high-tension wires, and outside of that, there's a nice older settled subdivision. Basically, when we moved there, we knew what our expectations were, and we knew what the future would hold for where we were going. Last year, we decided to move our primary residence back to Murfreesboro. We spent 9 months and too many miles driving back and forth through the mountains of North Carolina, looking for an area that both the current and future expectations were self-evident. Very few houses were available, and some did not meet our expectations concerning lot size, adjoining house locations, even some in the reserve. But it's safe to say in 9 months, we could not find anything like the reserve on this side of town, and that's where we wanted to live. One of the biggest attractions to the area was after looking at Google Maps and how the vacant lot was in fact zoned. We knew that we had to just wait for the right house, and our expectations could be met. As a whitewater kayaker, sometimes living in North Carolina, I can tell you that this area in Tennessee, all due respect intended, is very much behind the national level of concern that has been expressed about Bear Creek. And I have seen this in too many places, so I speak knowledge on that. In fact, this meeting would not even be happening simply for the reason of the creek. Density, two-lane road, etc. These are all additional issues with certain validity, but I'm addressing expectations. I feel the board has almost 100 people that have bought nice homes in a nice area with the expectation that nothing but what they have is what they would see similarly built in the future. I know I'm not the only person in this room, and you saw an awful lot of hands that came up, that would say, I would not have bought a house here if I had known it could be rezoned and this type of housing was put in there. I agree with this gentleman. They have a right to develop. They look like they've done a good job. It just doesn't fit. Last, I've heard that the county is excited about having approximately 60,000 new residents moving into our county, and it is part of the justification for townhouses, condos, and whatever else they get called. But please not forget that the percentage of these new people will not just be looking for a place to live. Some will be looking for a comfortable home in an area that is equal to or better than where they moved from. And some will be simply excited about their promotion that now can let them have the home of their dreams. The reserve is unique and a needed area for the growth of this county. The current 90 homeowners are looking to you to protect their current and future investment and provide a place for like-minded new neighbors to live. Personally, and I am a numbers person, in all due respect, I don't see a 9% reduction as being significant. I beg you to take all these comments this evening in totality and deny this request for rezoning.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Anybody else?
Good evening. My name is Sam Bates. I'm at 718 Stone Mill Circle. In contrast to my neighbor's opening remarks, I was born and raised in Murfreesboro. Been here 40 plus years. Seen a lot of growth in those years, as we all know. It's all been good. Enjoyed it. Glad that we're growing as a city. Has a lot of advantages. It's all good. But I also have no delusions about the property that's up for proposal tonight. I know that it will be developed, that there will be some housing on it at some point, some residential housing. And I guess my biggest concern is making sure it's the right development there, and making sure we get in the right development. Development being right, meaning it's closer to an RS-12, closer to what is in the surrounding areas. So I think that we should, that's my concern, is the density. In addition to the density, I think we spoke about traffic. I have concerns about the traffic as well. I have two boys, one that drives and one that's getting ready to drive, and honestly, it's a little nerve-wracking to hear when he's taken off out of the house to get out of our subdivision. I myself, as an experienced driver, feel like I take my life in my own hands some days, especially during rush hour. As mentioned, we have the VA traffic in the morning, which comes in, everyone's commuting in, and they get in there as well. I've experienced that every morning. It slows down, and the school zone's making it through that. So I don't think 250 units are going to help that situation at all. In addition to the comments that were made about the creek, I've known Hugh Jones since we were in Oakland High School together. Their property has had that creek come up to the driveway, even during heavy rains, what we consider heavy rain. It's not even flooding at that point. So I can't imagine what flooding plus this additional housing with all the concrete, asphalt, and roofing is going to do for that water, pushing it all in that direction. So I would respectfully request you deny this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. Anybody else?
My name is Robert P. I live at 4047 Bivens Hill Road in Reedville, Tennessee, way out in the country. But came here tonight because my district lines actually take in this proposed development and a lot of the housing there adjacent to District 15. And I've talked to a lot of these people, and first thing I want to tell you, I've been on planning for the county myself, and you're in a tough job. And, that seat gets pretty warm sometimes, and I appreciate what y'all do for this county and this municipality, and I want to say thank you. Especially want to say thank you for this hearing that we're having tonight. And I know the developer here has addressed several of the things, the drainage, the density, some of the road connections. But one thing that does disturb me, and something that they did do the first time around, is they reached out to the people that live in this neighborhood and said, hey, why don't we meet? I want to show you what we got. But they didn't do that this time, or at least that's the assumption that I'm getting from talking to the folks over there. Why didn't they say, hey, here's what we're proposing, 10% less. We know you didn't like this, so here's what we're going to do. And I understand these guys are out there to make money. And two, as planning commissioners, it's your job to make the decisions on where these developments go. Now, representing these people as a county commissioner, and some of them been in the city, some of them been in the county, I'm like the one gentleman that was saying is, when you buy a piece of property there, you're expecting, most time to have like development in that area. And I think it's what these people are asking for. They didn't come up here and say, don't annex us. They're not saying don't develop this property. They want to see it developed correctly. They want to see it developed as near as possible to the other development in that area. And that's the way I've taken it. And the things that have bothered me most about this, of course, I have a big issue with the drainage over there and the water quality. And, when we're adding this much housing, there is a problem there. We could have a 100-year flood, and then again, we could have 3 500-year floods in the same month. I mean, we've seen those kind of things, and we don't like to talk about that in planning, but we know that it happens. But one of the things from talking to these folks that bothered me most, and it was surprising, even though I drive this road myself 3 to 4, 5 times a week, is the traffic concerns there. These guys are telling me about internal traffic problems in their subdivisions that we're talking about adding more traffic to. They're telling me about the arterial roads that they're having to access at times, Emory Road being one of them, to cut across to get over to Osborne to get around some of the traffic they're seeing on Compton. And I think Mr. Vaughn was right. It'll probably be a good 20 years before we see Compton Road developed the way the state and the county and the city plans are. So I would just caution you, please look at this density. Try to keep that as close as you can to what we're seeing in these people's areas now. If you look at the map, I think the second lady that talked, I hope she gave you a copy of that, but if you look at that development, all the areas around that, most of that's R15. I think you've got a 12, but most of it I think was on R15, which is 3 lots per acre, or at least if I'm not mistaken. It may be 3.1. But, it's not 4. But anyway, thank you for your time, and I appreciate y'all letting us have this hearing. And, again, I appreciate the tough job y'all got in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. P. Anybody else? Last chance. Don't be shy. Come on up.
Good evening. And thank you guys for having this meeting tonight. Most of the points that I was going to make have all...
I'm sorry.
D.O. Sanders, 745 Stone Mill. My property actually backs up to the proposed development. And a lot of my concerns have already been mentioned tonight. And so I'll just unpack one of them that concerns me the most. We have a lot of small children in our neighborhood. I always see them out riding their bikes or skateboards or whatever. I always see people driving or jogging around or walking around the neighborhood or riding their bicycle. I would think that a lot of people bought in that community because there are a lot of, like, the community's closed off. There's one way to get in and one way to get out, and so there's not a lot of concern for traffic. And so obviously, like any other place where there is a high density traffic area like this proposed community would have, they're going to try to go to a lesser density to get to Compton Road to get basically up Thompson Lane as fast as they can to the interstate if they're trying to get out of Murfreesboro. And every evening when I come home, just on Thompson Lane, as you turn off of Broad Street, traffic is always backed up right there. And as you all know, we have a lot of subdivisions going out Thompson Lane all the way to Compton Road, and this is just going to continue to create that. And my concern is not only the inconvenience, but the safety for children and people who want to use the neighborhood for recreational purposes and things of that nature. And then also the water issue. My yard is one of the yards that has a drainage pipe in the back, and so I'm always flooded every time we get a good rain. And so I can speak firsthand about the challenges that adding space would cause. And so please take that into consideration as you make this decision, but like everyone else, I'd like this proposal to be denied and perhaps drawn up in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Anybody else? Last call. Okay. In that case, I'll close the public hearing. Questions and comments from members of the Planning Commission?
Mr. Lamb?
Mr. Young.
I'd like Mr. Huddleston to come up and answer some questions for us, please.
Mr. Sam Huddleston from the City of Murfreesboro Engineering Department.
Mr. Huddleston, as you know, our first concern in any development is water drainage and runoff. So we have an opportunity or a situation here where there's some potential for water, both upstream and downstream. Explain to me in layman's terms what this plan that they're showing does for the water.
This plan does to the water is would meet the city's requirements for stormwater management. It would provide water quality treatment, stream bank protection, and detention in the parts that they have identified there. In addition, the plan will also have to treat Bear Branch. Bear Branch we've studied. I think you'll recall that the Water and Sewer Board and the City Council approved funding for a Bear Branch watershed study about 3 years ago. That was jointly conducted with the Corps of Engineers. Corps of Engineers provided half the funding. We provided half the funding. We and the Corps of Engineers staff conducted that study. It was a flood study update, better information, better data, better model, and a better product. That flood study has been submitted to FEMA. FEMA will consider the information that we provided to them as they republish the flood maps for the Stones River watershed. And when I say Stones River, not just Rutherford County, but in fact a 4-county area, including Davidson County, where the Stones River, Percy Priest Reservoir confluence with the Cumberland River. We also included water quality in that study. I've made the statement before that Bear Branch may be the most studied stream in Murfreesboro. We've been out, we've looked at it. Our staff have walked every foot of that stream. We went back, walked it with the Corps of Engineers, environmental staff, Corps of Engineers, biologists, ecologists, wetland specialists. So we spent a lot of time studying that stream. We spent a lot of time understanding the water quality. It is on the state's list as an impaired water body. That means it's not meeting the standards that we would expect it to meet. Our job as the local government agency is to help devise plans to get the stream off the list. So we're using the water quality portion of the watershed study to help program some projects to do just that. The three things that have been identified in our study have been the absence of streamside vegetation, and a very common practice in our community for many years is to cut all the vegetation right down to the water's edge, whether that's for farming or agriculture or views or whatever. That's been a pretty common practice. So, but the water quality aspects, one thing that we've identified is absence of streamside vegetation. Second thing, Corps of Engineers study suggested is we identify and protect those streamside wetland areas. That helps with water quality. It helps with giving the water a place to store even in times of high flow and all of that. And then thirdly, the spot that they sample for the state, we're not seeing the kind of critters, I guess is the best way to say it, Mr. Young, in the water. And so we're looking to see some of these water quality improvements added to be able to see an improvement in the stream. The third thing that the Corps recognized, we asked them to review our city ordinances and compare our current development ordinances for water quality with their expectations. And one of the statements they made was, continue to implement your city ordinance. New developments need to meet this current standard. Certainly would help in protecting water quality. So we believe from those things that we'll see Bear Branch on its way to making it off of that state's list. And so I mentioned to you that this plan will have to address Bear Branch. In accordance with our development regulations, they'll have to provide some streamside vegetation. And if we've looked at their plan, there's several hundred feet of stream that runs across this property. They'll have to treat both sides of that stream. Mr. Taylor and I have talked in the past about this particular project, and he's aware of that, and his client's aware of that, and that'll be in their future development plans. But it's a great opportunity for us to see some improvements on Bear Branch from water quality. I'm not aware that they've identified wetlands in there, but if they have, they'll be obligated to protect and preserve those wetlands on that streamside vegetation, on the stream side as well. And then their plan also observes and protects the floodplain, meets the floodplain requirements, floodplain elevations. They're staying well away from the floodplain in the development of this plan. So overall, I think I would have to say that it meets and exceeds our requirements for floodplain management and water quality. And it's also consistent with the Bear Branch Watershed study.
Okay. Any Planning Commission members have a question of...
Mr. Hamilton, while you're up there, I know we had a couple county commissioners come up and speak. What has the county done in the past to improve the situation of Bear Creek? I know you said that the city had worked with the Corps of Engineering, and what to your knowledge has the county done to improve that situation in the past that would have indicated that there was really a concern for Bear Creek?
So just like the city, the county has a body of regulations that are very, very similar to ours. So any new developments in Bear Branch at the county level would have to meet those same standards. The county, I'm not aware that they've specifically studied that stream, but they did provide resources to us as we studied it. And they also participated in some of our study meetings, provided information on those studies. I think my memory serves me correct that about 50% of the watershed is currently city, and I think about 50% of that watershed for Bear Branch is county.
Okay. Mr. Holson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other questions and comments from the Planning Commission?
Chairman Lamb, I think this question was asked and answered at the last public hearing, but just for my own edification, Matthew, maybe you can take this one on. We keep talking about density and the fact that the applicant has reduced the density by 9 or 10%. Based upon the buildable area of this parcel that we're looking at, if it was zoned the same zone as the reserve, which is RS12, what would be the number of units that would be buildable on this parcel?
Mr. Taylor, do you know how many acres of this property is encumbered by the floodway?
I don't know the number of acres in the floodway off the top of my head, Matthew.
Assuming, Mr. Halliburton, that perhaps about between 5 and 10 acres is encumbered by the floodway, Mr. Taylor, would that be roughly that'd
be a good approximation.
So we'll just say 7 acres. That leaves about, or just round it out to about 50 acres of the tract that is developable. With RS12 zoning, it's about, once you factor out the land area for right-of-way, it's about 3 units per acre. So 50 times 3, it's about 150 single-family lots.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Okay.
I know this has been a concern of many of the people in the reserve about the connection from whatever happens here to the reserve. And Mr. Nipper answered the question. If there's a tornado that comes through there and there's only one way in, what do you do? And that works for both sides. That works for the reserve. That works for this development, whether it's this development or whatever it is. The city has a 25-year policy of extending streets. If you look at the bottom of this proposal, there's 2 stub streets to come through there. They may never be activated for another 20 years, but that's going to give this piece of property access to another way in and out. A good example is the Southridge tornado. It's probably been 15 years ago. A house was pushed across the street You couldn't get emergency services in there. So that's, I know you don't want it, I wouldn't want it either, but it's a necessary evil that has to be, well, evil's not a good word. It's a necessary condition that needs to be put in place. And that's with any subdivision in this city. And I'm proud of the fact that we have been very consistent with that. And one of the other things I've found out over the years by trial and error and observation is when people speed through your subdivision, they're not strangers. They know where the curves are. They know where the streets are. They know where the stop signs are. If I'm looking for 1414 whatever street, I'm going real slow looking for the address. The neighbors are the ones that usually speed through. And the best example I can give is a lady called us years ago and complained about the speed on her street. We sent the radar unit out, and she was the first one to get caught. So I just want to lay that out so, whether this passes or not, that connection is going through one of these days.
Surprisingly, the connection didn't really come up tonight. I don't speak for the Planning Commission, but I personally feel like this is akin to a bridge too far. I think it's a density too much. You've got our reserve, which is a very nice subdivision to the west, which is RS-12. You've got Esquire Estates to the east, which was developed back in the mid-'70s in the county, still in the county, but I'm sure the lots there are in the 15,000 square foot lot size and more, with the exception of the General's Run there, which is a relatively small development. Everything out here is on larger lots. I just have to agree with some of the comments made that this is not the right place, the right time for this dense of a development. And so I personally can't support it. But I'd like to hear from my fellow commissioners.
Well, the comment that I will make is it looks like it, on face value and the aesthetics of the development would be nice. However, and then I also agree with Mr. Vaught that I'm a big believer that a property owner should have the right to do and develop their property as suited based upon as it's zoned, and then they also have the right to come and make an application before this board and this municipality to change that zone. However, it's our job to evaluate that zoning change or that zoning change application. I would have hoped that based upon my question earlier, that we could come to a closer compromise with the surrounding developments and neighborhoods, that we would be closer to the 150 units that by right, in all likelihood, this landowner and developer would have if in fact he chose to develop. We wouldn't be having this public hearing if you want to know the truth of the matter. So I would like to see the developer and the property owner try to come to a compromise. I don't know that it's going to be 150 lots. 150 lots or 150 units that would be workable with the surrounding neighbors and have some buy-in with the surrounding neighbors with respects to this development. And that being said, I'll have to agree with Mr. Lamb. I'm not in a position to, I'm in opposition of this application.
Any other comments before I call for a motion?
There are two things that I hate to be bashed for roads that I have no control over. Maybe the city and the county should get together and fix Compton Road. How would that be? Mr. P., would that be feasible?
That would be good.
Is that a commitment, sir?
Depends on how much the state's going to put in.
Well, we know how much the state's going to put in. The other thing is some of these other subdivisions that are in the county are not on sewer. So it's sometimes not fair to compare a 20,000-foot lot to a smaller lot that has sewer. Now, and if you look at, I'm looking at this large map, Hawks Ridge is in the city, but some of the Esquire Estates and the Fairfield is, but some of these other subdivisions aren't, so they have larger lots. The word that we all hate is sprawl. Everybody hates the word sprawl. But you know what the opposite of sprawl is? Density. So when I hear complaints about we're taking up our great farmland and we're building houses on it. Well, that's sprawl. So one way to solve that is density. I'm not saying this is exactly what it should be, but that needs to be kept in our minds that density solves a lot of problems. And here you have to also remember that not everybody wants a 15,000-foot lot. There'll be a time when you'll want a smaller lot with no stairs and somebody to take care of the yard. I went over to Gallatin and looked at the age appropriate housing. I don't want to.
Independent living?
No, I don't think that's it. 55 and older.
It was on time.
and I was impressed. Flat surfaces, no steps into the house, things like that. People's needs change and people's requirements change. And there's really not anything like this in the city right now. So if you mesh all this up together, it's a tough decision.
Any other comments?
I'll be brief. I do think that there's a need for something to develop on this property because we do need an additional access point into your neighborhood in the event that something were to happen and you not be able to get into your neighborhood with emergency equipment. There is a need there. As far as density is concerned, this is probably, in my opinion, too much density. I think that when we look at it, we want our city to be as seamless as possible, and we want the neighborhoods to transition smoothly. I don't see this as a smooth transition into your neighborhood. And so I will be in opposition of this proposal.
Mr. Taylor.
I think based on hearing some of the neighbors still have concerns, as well as some of your concerns, we felt like maybe that we'd gone far enough with our elevations and what we did reduce. Obviously not. So if it's amenable to the commission, we would request a deferral, and we'll go back and work on the plan some more and see if we can get that number closer to an acceptable density.
That would be up to the Planning Commission.
Mr. Lamb.
Mr. Wade.
I was actually just getting ready to make that motion for a deferral. I think this is a project that's going to happen regardless. It might not be this one, but there's going to be homes that are going to be built on this property. And I think one of the things we have to realize, it's going to change our neighborhoods. A lot of people don't like change, but it's going to happen to every one of us. I used to look out in my field. I used to see the deer. But you know what? I can't see deer anymore because Middle Tennessee Electric is going to build behind my home. So I think one of the things we have to realize as we continue to grow, we're not going to have that view anymore. That's just part of a growing city. But somebody's eventually going to build something on this piece of property right there. And I think it'd be a good thing to go back and defer this, and let's see if we can get it right with the homeowners and the neighbors and make this happen for what's best for the city, not just for just individuals, but for the city of Murfreesboro.
A question, Mr. Bromley. Is this property's already been annexed?
No.
And has it already been annexed?
No, sir, not yet. We held a public hearing for the annexation on January 7th. The Planning Commission recommended approval. The property owner asked for it to remain in tandem with the zoning. So the annexation is on hold until it can track with the zoning. And I believe at this point, if the zoning doesn't go forward, the property owner would likely not wish to continue pursuing annexation. Is that correct, Mr. Taylor?
Okay. Mr. Ives, we've deferred this once already. They did change their proposal somewhat, so we came back again. Where are we on this deferral legally?
With a request by the applicant, I believe we're in good shape to go ahead to allow it to be deferred again.
Can I ask a question? This question's also been asked and answered in the past, but I don't remember what the answer is. If it's denied, at what point can they reapply?
I'd have to look at the book for that. I don't recall precisely. Matthew may.
I believe it's 18 months, but I'm going to get you a firm answer on that.
But that, I believe that's 18 months for
18 months.
the same or a very similar development. If they were to, if it's denied tonight, and for instance they could come back with a straight RS-15 or RS-12 development, I think the next day. But I think that the delay is for the same or a very similar development. Is that right, Matthew?
It says if an application for an amendment to the zoning ordinance or zoning map is denied by the council or is withdrawn by the applicant after a first reading of the property or the proposed ordinance by the council, a reapplication pertaining to the same property and requesting the same zoning amendment may not be filed within 18 months of the date final action was taken on the previous application or the date it was withdrawn unless such reapplication is initiated by the department, planning commission, or authorized by the council. So 18 months if...
Right, and that would be... But still, if they come back with a different plan, then they would a wholly different plan. It would be allowable.
No.
I would that it's this applicant has spent a lot of money and made a lot of effort on trying to make an application, and I don't think it's worth the difference. I don't see a reason to just flat out deny this request when they have requested a deferral and want to try to do something different, and especially when we have to debate over, the possibility that it might cause them to have to wait 18 months. I don't know that that's fair to the owner of the property, and I don't know who that owner is, but whoever that person is that owns that property right now. And I don't think it's fair to this developer. Whether we ever approve anything that they bring or not, I just don't think that's the right thing to do at this point. I would not want to deny it if they have asked for a deferral.
Am I to understand they did not have a community meeting?
The second.
Yeah,
they did not.
Chairman Lamb, we held a neighborhood meeting, or the applicant held a neighborhood meeting at which staff attended in November prior to the first public hearing. No neighborhood meeting was held prior to this public hearing. That's correct.
Okay. I think if we do decide to defer, I would like to request them to have another meeting with the stakeholders to propose whatever their next.
If they bring something back.
If they want to put something else back on the table.
We'd be happy to arrange that.
Okay.
We can't require that, but we're requesting. Is that correct?
No, we can require it.
No, I believe
we
that
can require it.
I believe that we can require that.
We can require it.
There's no question about
There's Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Wade, are you ready for your motion?
Yes. I make a motion to defer this at this time.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Can I ask a question before we go to a vote? I proposed this the last time, and I feel strongly about it again based upon the comments that have been heard here, and I'd like input from the whole commission. But I'd like to have another public hearing based upon whatever they come back with, since we're giving them the ability to defer.
Well, I think that'll be up to the Planning Commission to see if we want to require that or not. So that's up to us. Depends on how they change it. If they came back to something that we thought was definitely in line with what we have heard the concerns tonight, taking that into account, I think we're in line to go ahead and approve it accordingly. Plus, the meeting they'll have with the neighbors, they would be able to explain their position to them, and I'm sure we'll hear from the neighbors.
So, Mr. Halliburton, I want to be clear. You want another public hearing as well as a neighborhood meeting. Is that correct?
That's my opinion, yes, but...
Well,
I would think we would have another public
it
hearing.
most likely will, but we'll make that determination when they come back with another
Well,
plan.
the last time it was in the minutes that we dictated that we would have another public hearing.
So you want that for the record?
Correct.
Well, because we're asking for enough of a change that I can't imagine that it would be something that wouldn't have to come back for another public
I'll
hearing.
make the motion that we put in to have another public meeting.
Public hearing.
Public hearing.
Okay, the motion has been modified. Restate your motion, Mr. Wade.
Make a motion to defer this and also have another public hearing on this matter as it comes forward.
And a neighborhood meeting.
And a neighborhood meeting.
Motion has been made. Who seconded that? Mrs. Jones. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Chairman Lamb, may I get some clarification? Is that an indefinite deferral until the applicant is ready to come back?
Based on their request.
Thank you.
Okay. The next public hearing is a rezoning application for approximately 1.4 acres located at 1508 East Main Street to be rezoned from RM16 to commercial fringe, and approximately 0.47 acres located at 1512 East Main Street. Let me hold on just a second.
5 minute recess. Clear now.
Okay, let me restate the second public hearing then. Rezoning application for approximately 1.4 acres located at 1508 East Main Street to be rezoned from RM16 to commercial fringe, and approximately 0.47 acres located at 1512 East Main Street to be rezoned from RS15 to commercial fringe. Mr. Donnie DeMint is the applicant. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. Subject property is located at the southeast corner of East Main Street and South Baird Lane. It consists of two parcels. The first parcel, 1508 East Main Street, which is 1.4 acres. It's the blue L-shaped parcel right at the corner, which is currently zoned RM16, multifamily residential. And the orange parcel, which is 0.47 acres, located at 1512 East Main Street, and it is currently zoned RS15. There is a single-family residence on the blue parcel that's zoned RM16, and a single-family residence, which is the owner's personal residence, on the orange parcel zoned RS15. There's also a garage apartment on the orange parcel as well. So a total of 3 units on the subject property. The total acreage of the site is 1.87 acres. The applicant has requested that both of these parcels be rezoned to CF, commercial fringe. He has no specific development intentions for the property. However, he feels that this corner is appropriate for a commercial designation, and he would like to market the subject property for potential commercial development, for buyers to develop it with potential commercial development. The subject property is directly adjacent to the East Main Quarters apartment complex that was approved by the Planning Commission last month. That is directly to the east of the subject property, a 63-unit multifamily development which received approval last month. The subject property is directly across from a small commercial node at the northeast corner of Main and Baird. The various commercial uses in this node include the Far East Restaurant, a Domino's Pizza, a hookah lounge, a hair salon, and formerly a laundromat. Also, across Baird Lane to the west is an area that is zoned RM16 and primarily developed with multifamily uses such as Allen House Apartments, East Main Townhomes, and a little bit further to the west is the East Main development by Regent Homes, which has 0 lot line attached homes and a small commercial development as well. To the south are several subdivisions developed around the 50s and 60s. To the south along South Baird Lane and Tyne Avenue that are zoned RS-15, and further to the south of those homes is the Hobgood Elementary School, also zoned RS-15. Further to the east is additional RS-15 zoning and large estate lots along East Main Street. As I mentioned, the applicant feels that this location, especially considering the uses that are across the street and the university being along the north side of East Main Street, is appropriate for commercial zoning, and especially with the number of pedestrians that are in the area. He feels that pedestrian scale commercial developments will do well to serve the surrounding area. The CF zoning district is seen as a transitional commercial zone in between other non-residential uses and residential uses, and it omits a lot of the more what some would term obnoxious commercial uses, obnoxious with the way they relate to residential uses, those types of uses with outdoor storage and the like. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Dement, the applicant, is in the audience, and Mr. Clyde Roundtree from Huddleston Steel is available as well to answer any questions representing Mr. Dement.
Does Mr. Dement or Mr. Roundtree like to make a statement before we open the public hearing? No?
We're indicating no.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from members of the Planning Commission? If not, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Okay. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing. What are the wishes of this commission?
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Item C is a PRD amendment for approximately 35.9 acres along the west side of St. Andrews Drive in Evergreen Farms PRD. Old South Properties Incorporated is the applicant. Mr. Plumley.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. Subject property is located along the west side of St. Andrews Drive. It is the townhome portion of the Evergreen Farms PRD, which was approved in 2004. You see on the map in front of you, it is the area in orange. The area to the north is the single-family portion of that same PRD that was approved in 2004. The townhome portion was approved for 280 units in 70 buildings. When we were reviewing a plan recently for this development, we noticed that their most recent phase actually began to exceed cumulatively that 280 number. We made Old South Properties, the developer, aware of this, as well as their engineer, Huddleston Steel, and they promptly made an application to amend their PRD to increase the number of buildings from 70 to 73 and the number of units from 280 to 334, an increase of 54 units. And that increases the overall 35.9 acres from a density of 7.8 dwelling units per acre to 9.3 dwelling units per acre. What they have indicated in their materials to staff is that when they initially made application, they envisioned that the buildings would have 4 units per building. A number of their non-garage units, the buildings themselves contained a narrower unit and 5 units per building. So once they began adding the 5-unit structures instead of the 4-unit structures, that number of units began to increase, and it was something that both staff and the applicant and the applicant's engineer did not pick up until this time. When we saw that number on the plan that was above 280, so they have made an application to amend that PRD to increase that density from 280 to 334, as well as several other minor modifications that they've noted in their letter. As this is an increase in density, it does require an amendment to the approved PRD. They have submitted both a copy of the 2004 plan, if we could pull that up, as well as the 2015 plan, which is a little bit more detailed. Some of the units, some of the buildings have shifted somewhat, in addition to there being more units and more buildings. But the changes have been outlined both on this plan and in the letter that Mr. Steele submitted. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions with regards to this PRD amendment. Mr. Steve Steele of Huddleston Steel Engineering is present, as is Mr. Dan Bobo with Old South Properties, and they'll be happy to answer any questions. I don't know that if they have a presentation or not, but they're certainly welcome to make a few statements.
Any questions by members of the Planning Commission? Okay. If not, I'll open the public hearing. Ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Cook, and I live at 3212 Terrapin Court. I purchased my home in Villas of Evergreen Farms in 2007, and I was one of the first buyers, I believe, in the area. I was a little bit surprised to get the notice. I've learned a lot since I received it. It's definitely not my area of expertise at all. So, but after doing a little bit of research and getting the plans from Mr. Lewis, I would just like to say that I oppose this for several reasons. One of which is the homes there are, for instance, my building was one of the first ones, and it has 5 units. The homes are 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom, and I had hoped when I was moving in that it would be smaller families, single folks, myself. But you know, I've been noticing with some of the homes that have 3 bedrooms, there's a lot more than two vehicles. Each home has 2 dedicated parking spaces in front of it, and I've been seeing some residents using visitor spaces as parking spaces. So my biggest concern would just be the density issue. That seems like a big leap from the plans that I saw at the Old South sales office when I purchased my home in 2007. So I would just ask that you take that into consideration and deny this proposal. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Cook. Anybody else? Nobody? I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Blomley.
Chairman Lamb, I did want to mention that, just to get on the record, I'd put a letter that we received in the mail from a Mr. Joseph Hurley at 3307 Perlino Drive on the Planning Commission's tables.
I've read that. What are the wishes of this commission?
Mr. Blomley, can they put those, the little maps we had again back up? Just like the master plan look at this?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have that? Yeah. Oh, thanks. Oh, thank you. See, my iPad wouldn't come on tonight. Sorry. So the yellow and the orange on either side of it, what would be the, those are the single-family areas?
Yes, ma'am. That those are both a part of the Evergreen Farms PRD that was approved in 2004. Mm-hmm. The blue being the townhome portion, and the yellow and orange being different types of the single-family portion.
And so when have they started? They've started building some of these units in this area, and that it's after the fact that they notice that it's going to be more than was approved originally?
Yes, ma'am. I think they have recently had Phase 4 and Phase 5 approved, subject to them not going over the allowed density from the 2004 plan until a PRD amendment is approved. And I think it was something that as you look at the Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3, you're so far away from that 280 number that we as staff, until we started seeing the numbers increase and increase, we didn't realize that they were getting so close to that 280 threshold until they were right on it. And I believe they have one additional phase after Phase 5, which is the one that was approved last month.
Any questions or comments?
Mr. Brown, you're saying that under construction, where they were up to a point, and what were the checks and balances there? Where were they in place that we're at this point tonight?
I think in the first 3 phases, they were probably up into the upper 100s, low 200s, and we just didn't connect the dots that they were getting so close to their approved density until they got up to the 4th and 5th phases. But yeah, they're, I'd say Mr. Bobo might be able to confirm that they've got approximately 200 units in there right now.
I'm Dan Bobo with All South Properties. I appreciate your time with our application. And yes, we're through section that were Phase 3. We're in the high 100s, and then we came back with a Phase 4 and a Phase 5, and that is where we realized that we were approaching, I think, somewhere with Phase 5, with all of those units, we exceeded the original application. And so at this point, Mr. Blomley and Mr. Steele and Old South presented this application to increase the density, which we believe will still, I guess, be an efficient use of the land. It'll maintain what's existing. You know, as we have developed through, we changed the units a little bit to, I guess, meet demand or what the market is requesting or what the market demands as far as unit style, bedrooms, single car garage, those kinds of things. So we're trying to work with the city to get our PRD in this application in line with where we are in the development.
Mr. Bobo, if I may, your company has done dozens of PRDs.
Yes, sir.
And your company knew what you had designed, which was 4-unit buildings, right? So who decided that they could put 5-unit buildings on this property when your design, your approved design, your zoning plan called for 4?
I would have to defer the answer to that. This PRD, the Evergreen and Villas of Evergreen, the original application was 2000, Matthew? 2004. There's been some personnel changes which have taken place over the years, and some people may know. And so at this point, if Mr. Steele knows any more about it, I would ask him to come up. But as far as what happened, I mean, each section comes in, we go work with staff on comments and addressing, you know, their comments. We come before Planning Commission and then proceed from there.
Mr. Ives, do you feel a deferment would be in order to be able to resolve some of these questions?
It might be appropriate, yes.
Mr. Whitaker.
I would agree. Mr. Brown, they were never in violation, though. If they continued building this out, they would be in violation, but they never were. They have not been in violation of this PRD yet, have they?
They have not exceeded the 280 unit allowed density on the property yet, and that was when Phase 5 came through. at last month's Planning Commission meeting for site plan approval. We made sure that we recommended the condition, and the Planning Commission approved it on the condition that they do not, that they can build, that Phase 5 was approved, but they cannot permit any more than what would cumulatively put them over that 280 unit number that was approved in 2004.
So an error was made, and they caught the error.
We caught the error.
Okay, you caught the error, and that's even better. And then this has come out of it, a request for a PRD amendment.
That's correct.
Mr. Young, I believe the 280 unit maximum is only one of the conditions of the PRD. They submitted a design, they submitted plans, and I believe that all those plans called for 4-unit facilities. Is that right, Mr. Steele? In your original plan?
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, not exactly. If we're talking about the PRD, the actual document,
yes,
it talked about 280 units. I don't believe it said that there were going to be 4-unit buildings. That was just the understanding. When you look at the math, what we at Huddleston Steel did, we prepared the exhibits that showed 70 footprints or 70 buildings.
And that the 2004, we could put it up on the screen right now.
Right. The 2004 planned residential development, the picture, if you will, that you're looking at on the screen has 70 building spaces, 70 separate buildings. Now, unfortunately, as Mr. Bobo alluded to, the gentleman who put together the packet is no longer with us. But when you do the math, you come up with 4 units per building. At some point in the development process, reacting to market conditions, Old South went to 5 units per building. And I don't think there's anything in this pattern book that was approved in 2004 that talks about the number of units per building. It was just a total number and the number of footprints, if you will. So I was around and helped with that. I didn't fully prepare the booklet, but I can assure you there was no attempt to deceive the city or anybody with this. It was just an oversight until we got up to the number of units. Because once the planned development was approved, I know we weren't thinking about, well, we've only got 280 units, we got 150 to go or 100 to go. We were looking at the plan, the footprint, and if you look at the footprint, it's very similar. There's very few differences. I noted in the letter what some of the other differences are, but the basic footprint is the same. The bottom line is several of the buildings, instead of having 4 units per building, if you will, have 5. And that's why we end up with about 54 more units.
I think that had I studied this plan and looked at this, I would say all those footprints are the same size. So that would mean to me their buildings are all going to be the same size because that's the footprint you gave us. But someone decided that they didn't need to follow that plan and they could just make changes on their own.
I don't think that was a conscious decision. I mean, that's why we're here to try to correct it.
Right. And
at the time, you might remember the consideration and approval of planned developments back in even 2004 is not done to the level of detail that you're doing them today. So I don't know that, I mean, I can tell you nobody tried to deceive you.
I wasn't here in 2004, but in 2005 I was, and the planned developments that I began seeing at that time had a pretty high level of scrutiny for all the details.
I'm just saying, I've got a copy in my hands here of what was presented and approved, and I believe what we would present today for a 275-acre planned development would be thicker than what's in that pattern book.
But I think what you're saying too is that the footprint, whether it was originally a 4-unit building, and the units are probably smaller in width and fit 5 units in that building as opposed to 4.
Yes, ma'am.
In the same footprint.
Right. Yes,
so
ma'am.
the
Same
footprint isn't necessarily changing, Mr. Ives, I don't think. But
Jones,
yes.
What I think has happened over this period of time is basically he stated that they had a footprint, and over market has changed. They went to smaller units as market dictated. They went from a 4 to a 5-unit building, not exceeding the footprint, but the actual unit numbers. And basically, it appears that over a period of time, they crept up to that density number. And going back through and looking at the plan book, I'm not sure, and we'll be happy to go back if the commission chooses to defer this and come back with more information. But it appears that there was no hard rule of the 4 units. There were at some point in time, and I was not in this position at that time, but they were allowed to increase the number of units as long as they didn't exceed that footprint. And that's how they crept up to that number. And as we all know, that the market has changed over the last 5 or 6 years or the last 10 years. And typically on these large developments, they will go in and modify whether it's a 3-bedroom, go to a 2, to meet the market demands in that price point. Because as prices increase, the affordability of those units to make them more affordable, sometimes they have to cut down the square footage, total overall square footage. And I think that's how we got where we are today. Now, if the commission wants us to go back, pull that plan book, do some more investigation, we'll be happy to do that and come back at the next meeting.
And Mr. Whitaker, I would add also that I believe on Mr. Steele's site plans for phases 1, 2, and 3, the number of units, which have been approved, staggered from around 2005 or 2006 on, have all shown the number of units per building. Is that correct, Mr. Steele?
They have. I mean, the site plan is presented in much greater detail than what was presented in an exhibit in the pattern book.
50-something units is quite a increase in density on this, though. I just want to make sure we're on solid footing before we approve this or disapprove it.
And the extra parking, and that does sound like it's already an issue. And if we have that many extra units, where do the extra cars and extra visitors park? I don't know if there was an increase in number of visitor parking spaces or anything like that.
Actually, there have been as we have gone along, and there is room to add more. The parking requirement, I don't think is caught, and this is from 10-year memory, so excuse me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the parking requirement is spelled out in the pattern book. We address that at the site plan approval stage, where we say how many units there are, how many bedrooms, how many parking spaces are required, how many are provided, and we have indicated areas for guest parking. In fact, I know we had those areas in the last 2 sections that were recently approved. So parking should not be an issue. We have the ability to add more if we need it.
Yeah, but we need to incorporate that in whatever we're approving on the change to the PRD. I'm feeling like we're getting a little rushed here on what we're trying to decide, Mr. Steele.
And that's fine. We understand that. I guess what I'm trying to relate, Mr. Lamb, is a PRD that was approved 10, 15 years ago will not necessarily be to the level of detail of what you're accustomed to looking at today.
Well, most of us were here 10 or 15 years ago, so we remember, and we were younger then, too.
We all were.
Mr. Steele, I wasn't up here 10 years ago, so let me ask you a couple questions.
Certainly.
The site plan that you presented initially that showed the 70 footprints for the buildings, has that parking space that was allotted in that site plan, has that been modified to this date?
I don't know that I could give you a good answer right now without going back. When I look at this exhibit, the scale it's at, I couldn't answer that because my eyesight is such I couldn't count the spaces.
Mr. Steele, sorry, Mr. Eddie, go ahead.
If it hasn't changed, then I'm assuming that if we've added the number of density in the buildings, then we're probably going to come up short of parking spots. And I know that on the next site plan that for your next project, you would probably go in and amend that and add additional spaces. I get that part.
I think actually what we had was probably a lot greater number of spaces than were required in the initial pattern book, because when I look at it, the footprints of the buildings are basically the same. The road patterns are basically the same, and we show the parking, at the 9-foot width. Now, I would have to go through and count all of those because that's not something we did initially, I don't believe, because I don't remember it. But we could go through and count. But I think what we find is we had a lot more parking shown initially than was required. And what we would have now would still meet the city's zoning requirement.
The PRD that was approved, when we approved it, we were looking at this X amount of density on this piece of property. We're now proposing to change that. And I know that comments have been said that trends have changed. And obviously, there was a tremendous amount of trends that took place in 2008 to this time. Would it be asking too much in order to probably reduce that density somewhat to go back to 4 units per building? Has the market trend shifted enough that in order that we don't overload our schools, overload the neighborhood, overload the streets that we anticipated would handle X amount of traffic, could we reduce? Do you think there's an opportunity that we could reduce in any PRD that would be presented back to the 4 units per structure or plat?
I think to answer your question, I would say, yes, we could, but on the other hand, you mentioned the economic conditions, the demand. I couldn't answer that right now, standing here. I don't know what the demand is. I don't sell the townhomes. I would remind you, though, that this pattern book was phase 2 of Evergreen Farms. This encompassed 275 acres, of which about 211 acres were single-family detached. 28 acres were common areas, and 35 acres, which is about 10 to 15% of the total that's in this phase 2, was the single-family attached. So when you look at 54 units on its own merit, that sounds like a lot of units.
Right.
But when you look in the scheme of a 275-acre phase 2 development, phase 2 of a development, I think the first phase had close to, that goes way back, close to 250 acres. My recollection, this was a 600-acre farm, and we did a phase 1. We started out in straight zoning, then went to a planned development on phase 1, and then we did this phase 2 on the remaining 275 acres. So I guess I don't see the 54 units as being, in that scheme, as big a number.
Mr. Smotherman, I think I can answer your question with regards to parking. He does have the parking calculations on both site plans, and in 2004, they provided 700 spaces. All of those were in striped parking spaces, not in garages. The total number of parking spaces provided in the 2015 plan is 866. That includes 135 garage spaces and 135 driveway spaces. So they've modified it by putting some in driveways and garages, but have increased overall to 866.
Matthew, were the number of spaces in the narrative back in the original?
I'm sorry?
Were they in the narrative as opposed to on the exhibit?
I don't recollect, and I don't have that with me right now. Chairman Lamb?
Well, my question, that sounds good on the front end, but my question would be how much guest parking is allowed and how is it affected? Because what we've seen in these high-density developments a lot of times is a neglect of adequate guest parking. So I was just wondering if a 2-week deferral would adversely affect the applicant and give you time to get with the staff and maybe make a little clearer presentation to the Planning Commission maybe in 2 weeks at our afternoon meeting.
Sure. Yes, sir. No, sir, it's not a problem, and yes, sir, we'll be glad to work with them. That was
what a great guy.
I'm going to move for deferral.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed.
Thank you for
Thank you,
your
Mr.
time.
Steele. Mr. Bobo, thank you very much. The next public hearing is a rezoning application for approximately .64 acres located at 417 East Burton Street and 419 East Burton Street and 427 East Burton Street to be rezoned from CM RS8 to OGR. Mrs. Marion Catrice Dunson, Mr. Rodney W. Graves, and Mrs. Teresa Ann Carlton are the applicants. Mr. Blumley.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. Subject property consists of 3 parcels located at the northwest corner of East Burton Street and Lee Street. You may recall having seen in the news within the last month or so that there was a triplex that burned down. It is on the center of these 3 parcels that is colored in purple. The triplex was a non-conforming triplex. The CMRS 8 zoning district is a hybrid medical office, single-family residential zoning district, and a triplex is not a permitted use in the CMRS 8 zone. So as such, the Mr. Graves, who owns the center parcel where the triplex burned down, would not be able to rebuild on that property another triplex. He would be limited to the uses that are permitted in the CMRS 8 zone. Mr. Graves does desire to rebuild a triplex on the subject property to go back essentially with the same type of use that was there. And so after the triplex burned down, he came and met with the planning staff, and we discussed his options. The neighboring property to the north is zoned OGR. The OGR zone is a hybrid zone also, office general, residential, but it does permit additional residential uses, multifamily residential uses that the CMRS 8 zone does not permit. So Mr. Graves discussed with the planning director the possibility of rezoning that property to OGR. Mr. Whitaker told him that that the only way that the planning staff could support such a rezoning would be if he got his adjoining neighbors that are zoned CMRS 8 on board as well, so that we wouldn't have somewhat of a spot zone on that parcel. So all 3 property owners, Ms. Dunstan, Mr. Graves, and Ms. Carlton have filed separate applications with their signatures on them, all to be heard in this one public hearing, to rezone those parcels from CMRS 8 to OGR. And the property abuts property zoned OGR to the north and across Lee Street to the east, directly adjacent to the subject property to the south and to the west are properties that are zoned RS8. But there are a variety of uses in the immediate vicinity, including single-family residential uses, multifamily residential uses such as duplexes and triplexes, and some lighter commercial uses as well, such as medical offices, a specialty shop, a bed and breakfast, and a funeral home that was recently approved across the street on the next block over. So the applicant has requested to rezone the property to OGR. Curiously enough, the corner parcel right there in the corner of Lee and Burton next door to Mr. Graves' property, this is the property that is owned by Ms. Carlton, also has a non-conforming triplex on it, and Ms. Carlton would be in the same situation if her triplex burned down as well. Without it being rezoned, she would not be able to rebuild. So the rezoning from CMRS 8 to OGR would not only allow Mr. Graves to rebuild his triplex that burned down, but in the event the triplex on the corner parcel were destroyed, it would be allowed to be rebuilt as well if the property were rezoned. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Graves is in the audience today. I don't know if either Ms. Dunstan or Ms. Carlton are in the audience, but we need to hold a public hearing on this matter and formulate a recommendation for City Council.
Okay. Any questions before I open the public hearing? In that case, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
Rodney Graves, 1438 River Rock. I'm the owner of the 419 East Burton. I'm for it, so I can build a house back.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Anybody else? Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to commend the staff for solving a problem in a situation where a fire causes undue hardships. So with that, I move for approval.
Second. Motion made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. There you go, Mr. Graves. The final public hearing, and I apologize for you folks having to wait this long, being the fifth of the 5 public hearings tonight. So we'll move right on with it. The street renaming request to rename an existing street in the Blackman Farm subdivision from Barwood Drive to Miranda Drive. City of Murfreesboro Planning Department is the applicant. Mr. Plummer.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. The subject property is the Barwood Drive public right-of-way, which is located, as you mentioned, in the Blackman Farm subdivision. It is in the color purple on the map in front of you. And let me give you some history with this. Of course, Barwood is in the Blackman Farm subdivision, and it was platted in 2008 with Section 6, of the subdivision. Miranda Drive is an existing county road which intersects with Gresham Lane a little bit further to the east of this property. The Hillwood plan development was approved with the extension of Barwood Drive curving to the south and teeing into Miranda Drive, which would be extended from the east. Subsequently, as this portion of the Hillwood subdivision never came to fruition, an amendment to that plan was approved in 2010. And whereas Barwood Drive was intended to tee into Miranda Drive, now it was shown as a straight street connecting to Miranda Drive. So it would be one continuous street from Blackman Farm all the way over to Gresham Lane. And while at the time in 2010 that was approved, it has presented us with a street naming challenge now. As Hillwood has begun to rapidly develop now under its current developer, the connection will eventually be made to where Barwood and Miranda Drive will all be one street. With that being said, it is not good practice to have a street change names unless there is a zero street, as we call it, i.e. Old Fort Parkway, South Church Street, Memorial Boulevard, or a major intersection. And if we were to do nothing, Miranda Drive would do just that. It would change really for no rhyme or reason to Barwood Drive at some point in the Hillwood development in between these two subdivisions. So I've consulted with emergency services, including the police department, the fire department, and 911, and all 3 agencies are in favor of renaming Barwood Drive to Miranda Drive so that we have consistency in street naming, so that it will all be one street name from Gresham Lane all the way to Axelwood Drive. Not doing so would create the potential for confusion for not only the motoring public, but also for emergency service providers as they are attempting to locate properties in times of emergency. With that being said, we know that changing a street name, which also involves changing addresses, is quite an inconvenience for the people who are, who are affected. It's something that I've been a part of as being the person who carries out the street naming and addressing process for the city of Murfreesboro, and I've been involved in a number of street renamings and readdressings, including Kimbrough Road, Beasley Road, Blackman Road, when we were doing the Veterans Parkway construction. So I know that there's quite a bit of inconvenience involved. But what I would say, and there are 19 addresses on Barwood Drive that would be affected if this is approved, is that we do work very hard to ensure a smooth transition. There will be some work on the front end by the homeowners, but we take care of a lot of that work as well in notifying all of the emergency service providers, notifying all of the utilities, notifying the post office. We try to do as much work as possible, and we are always there if one of the residents is having an issue with one of their service providers, to reach out and intervene and try to help those residents out to make it as seamless as possible. But with that being said, we do need to conduct a public hearing on this street renaming request, which has been brought to you today by the Planning Department. If it's approved, then we would take it to the council for ratification of the Planning Commission's action, and then at some point in the near future, we would implement the street name change.
Okay. Any questions? Not, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
Thank you, Council, for allowing us to speak, and I think he really spoke well as to the history.
Would you give your name and address, sir,
I'm
please?
sorry, sir. Yes, Ron Robinson, 3412 Barwood Drive.
Thank you.
I am representing the Barwood Drive block of 3400. And as you can see, we have considering we have 19 homes there, we have a pretty good turnout today. These people are concerned, and so am I. Again, I think you very well spoke about the history to give you some sense of our situation. We have, over the years, now 7 to 8 years now, have experienced quite a bit with the Syntex homes and trying to get to a point where we felt comfortable with our purchase. And we've come across a lot of difficulties. But having said that, we stopped, I think, and I don't know the conditions of it, I think you might know it better than I. The Syntex had the idea of building on the other side of us where the new builder is at today. That was denied, or they lost interest in, I don't know which. But having said that, the Barwood Drive is now open, or will be open, by the new builder, and so our street will extending more traffic through Barwood Drive. There are 19 homeowners on Barwood Drive. We are in the city of Murfreesboro. The Miranda Drive has 13 homeowners. We're not sure how Barwood was not included in the idea of changing our name, but we just simply want to make the case today that Barwood Drive has more residents than Miranda Drive does currently. The builder, I'm not sure what their interest would be pertaining to the street name, but it would seem to me that the inconvenience and the difficulty is put upon the homeowners of Barwood Drive. So having heard the history and the difficulties that we've experienced in our community, we just want to suggest to this committee that it would be a big burden and challenge for us, and all of our homeowners are concerned. We put together a petition whereby of the 19 homeowners that we have, 14 have signed the petition, and they've asked us to come to this council and make as strong of a case as we can to let you know of that burden. And we're asking that you maintain the street, Barwood Drive, as its current name, and that you deny the change.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
This is a health and safety issue.
Good evening. I'm Craig Summerall. I live at 3432 Barwood Drive. I've been there for almost, I'm working on my 5th year. I think it was covered pretty much. We do have 19 homes versus 13 homes. We have a longer street than they are. And we've all measured it out. I think several of us walked it out and counted it out. But the issue that bothers me is that it's kind of like a rush thing. You know, I left this afternoon, and there's nothing but a cow field out there. There's nothing been done. They're not even quite close to getting into that street. I think the push to change it to Miranda, I think we need to slow this down just a little bit. If the map up here, as I walk around that property, and I've spent a little time walking around it, there's another street that's going to apparently go over to Bragg. Okay? So that's not a straight shot, one street thing that's going all the way to Gresham, as far as I can see now. I may be wrong, but it's not. There's going to be another street that's going to go across it. It's Deerfield that runs on the other side. It should go across it and hook up to where the roundabout is on the other side. So it's not like we don't have a separation of the street. So I think I would like to know whether this is true or not. What's stopping that street right there from being the point we separate Barwood and Miranda? Yeah, it's just kind of, I can't believe they're going to make a straight street across there without any turnoffs. If they do, then Barwood's going to be in a lot of trouble anyhow, because that's going to wind up being a high-speed cut through on a little bitty windy road with a lot of little kids. So I think, yeah, that's basically where I'm sitting at. I just kind of think it's kind of like a rush thing to change us to Miranda Drive. I mean, I'm an old guy. I got time to sit around and go places and change addresses and do all that kind of silly nonsense. But yeah, it's, as far as the emergency people, now if you approve this name change on Barwood, now what you're going to have is you're going to have Barwood over here separated by cow pasture and Miranda over here. The fire department's over here on our side. If you get an emergency call, and I know that, you know, they're going to know where Barwood is, but they're not going to, if you got a Miranda Drive, I'm not sure that, you know, they hook a Miranda Drive, they're going to be way on the other side. So, you know, what's the point of doing it? If you're going to, I think we need to figure out where the street's going to be at and where the cross street's going to be at, and not rush into something. I don't have anything against Miranda. I mean, I've known a few Mirandas in my life, and most of them were pretty responsible. But, yeah, I like Barwood. The other thing is it took us about 4 years to get on Google. So now if you're going to take us off Google again, we'll be lost. Okay. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
Evening. My name is Jim Krause. I'm here with my wife, Linda. We live at 3424 Barwood Drive. We just moved here from Columbia, Tennessee in June, and we really like the neighborhood. So I just got finished changing address and my state driver's license. But besides that, and you were pointing out to it earlier that in Murfreesboro, you can stay on the road, you can be on Franklin Highway, an old fort, then you're on Memorial, Fortress Medical Center. even if you go out here and heading home and you're on West Vine, as soon as you hit Broad and you cross straight across, you're on Front. I understand, you try to keep that to the minimum. It certainly would make it easier if names of the street were the same all the way through. But since the precedence is already there, I agree with Craig. If there's got to be an intersection somewhere between Grisham and Axelwood. Why can't there be a division for Miranda and Barwood Drive? There's nobody living in that field now. There's no street. The people that have homes there in the future won't care one way or another if it's Barwood Drive or if it's Miranda. I can assure you. Last thing I worried about was the name of the street when we bought over here in Blackman Farm. So I really, since there is such a precedence of changing the street in the middle of the stream, so to speak, throughout Murfreesboro, and even though it's not going to be a main intersection, I just really don't see why we have to change the name of our street. So I would request that you deny this request.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krause. Anybody else?
Good evening. I know it's late, so we will be brief. For the sake of not being a dead horse, most of us have had our say.
Your name, sir, and address.
I apologize. My name is David Swanson. I live at 3421 Barwood Drive. I agree with almost every point that we've had here, every point. There's a few things that I did want to stress. As you pointed out, it is a very large hassle to have to go ahead and change all those pieces, and I do appreciate all the help that you would offer during this change, but it is a costly and very hard thing to do. Understanding that if Barwood does not change and it does connect, Miranda would obviously have to make a change as well, which would not be easy. I would ask that we try to find a way that we can make both parties happy, as it is not developed, maybe another intersection. But one of the things that I did want to stress before I leave is when we connect that, we already have a very large problem with cars speeding through at very impressive speeds. We have 96 on one side, we have Medical Center on the other. Kind of creates a danger. We have a lot of kids. I myself have 2 little boys that one's only walking just now, so it's not like we're in danger immediately, but as that gets connected, there will be a whole lot more traffic coming through. So I'm hoping that there can be maybe a better design, make everyone a little happier, but if they have to be connected, I would have to say that this would have to be a numbers game. 19 versus 13, you're inconveniencing the more people by changing Barwood than you would Miranda. So that would be all I have to say today. Thank you.
Anybody else?
That's what your proposal is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll close the public hearing. 19 versus 13. I don't know that those, with what's planned for Miranda and Hillwood, will give you quite a bit more numbers than that, won't you?
Well, the reason why we chose to pursue the renaming of Barwood is that Miranda Drive is in a different jurisdiction. It would require the action of the County Road Board to rename to Barwood Drive. And in consultation with the County Planning Department, we felt that since the action that caused this was something that was initiated by the city, that it would be the appropriate measure to take it to our Planning Commission as opposed to taking it to the County Road Board. And that was, as I mentioned, after consultation with the County Planning Department, because we did consider the various options. I would like to point out, I did put together an illustration for you, and we put that up on the board, please. Hillwood is developing rapidly, and the connection is, I believe it's just a matter of time. you can see the area that is shaded out. And this exhibit has the master plan for Hillwood. And this area here, this L-shaped section, is the section of Hillwood that was approved at Planning Commission either last month or the month before. And it contains the extension of Barwood. And that's why we brought, we weren't trying to be hasty in bringing this to the Planning Commission, trying to act quickly. But the fact of the matter is that a decision has to be made as to what the section of this street, whatever it is named, is going to be called, because plans are in the works for that connection to be made from the existing Barwood to the existing Miranda, and plans have already been approved by the Planning Commission for the extension of that street. So that's why we felt it was timely to go ahead and bring it to the Planning Commission for action. Now, that doesn't mean that we will implement it immediately. We will keep track of when construction progresses on the construction of this next section of Hillwood, and then we will try to time it accordingly if it's approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council. As far as changing the street name at a minor or a local residential street, and as you can see on this exhibit, there are several intersecting streets. It's not a straight street with no intersections. It does have intersections, but that would deviate greatly from our current protocol. We do have streets that change names, but those streets change names. The examples that the gentleman gave are at major intersections. Many of them are what we call zero streets, because they have to change names because of the property numbering. This would greatly deviate from our normal protocol in changing the street name at a very minor intersection of another local subdivision street. I take the advice when I'm evaluating these situations of our police, fire, and 911 very seriously, as they are the most important service that we provide. And if they tell me that it could potentially cause confusion, in my opinion, that's reason to bring something before the Planning Commission for consideration.
I'm going to show him my artwork.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay. So we just approved this section that's kind of grayed out. And I know we like to approve the connections. Okay, see this beautiful artwork right here? Here's the section we just approved. Here is Barwood Drive.
Mm-hmm.
We have a connection right here. Why couldn't we kind of slightly cul-de-sac
A roundabout.
that little section, or just make a turn? Don't even, we shouldn't have made this connection here in this case. We have other places for this connection, lots of them, and we just shouldn't have connected them. We should have seen that.
In the original zoning plan, as I mentioned, it did both streets teed into each other. So at that point in the original plan development, this was a non-issue. But when it was amended in 2010 to be one continuous street, then this became an inevitable issue. And the street layout is a part of the approved plan development zoning on the property.
That we just approved.
That we approved in 2010.
This section that's grayed?
That was the preliminary plat approval. They already have their zoning entitlement, which included the street layout, and the preliminary plat was submitted consistent with that 2010 PRD approval. So that's the preliminary plat that I've grayed out on that map.
We run into this situation. We've seen it in the Planning Commission before. When you have different subdivisions developing on either side of an undeveloped tract, different developers, different years that they're developed. In this case, we're looking at a county subdivision that was developed many years ago, 30, 40 years ago. And then the land in between them stays vacant for sometimes months, sometimes many years. And then eventually it's master planned out, and it becomes evident to all the planners that the best layout is to make the two roads connect. But we've seen it before. We've had a hard time because you can't have like Miranda Drive here and Miranda Drive over there. It's going to be very confusing, you know, with a big block in between it. That causes confusion as well. It couldn't be foreseen at the time when Barwood was developed and named that it would ever be required to hook into Miranda further to on the other side of that big field that was out there at the time. But now that all of this has been master planned together, it's become evident that that's the best, makes the most sense for good planning purposes to lay it out this way. And it's always a hassle, but we've had to change street names before, and it never, I mean, somebody gets affected adversely. The number of residents that will end up being on Miranda Drive are going to be a whole lot more than what's on Barwood right now, according to this plat I've got right here, lots that are already approved, not counting the people that live over. Miranda comes off Grisham Lane, doesn't it?
That's correct.
And those houses were built in the 70s, I believe. I don't know. It's a difficult thing. It certainly puts the residents of Barwood in a bad position of having to go through the trouble and the hassle to get their addresses changed again. But I don't see any way around it.
In between.
Mr. Smother.
They've got an approved plan to do it.
Just a couple examples: Thompson Lane, Compton Road, Fortress Medical Center Parkway, Loki, Haynes Drive, DeJarnette, Old Fort Parkway, Memorial. And we've seen changes before where we saw Samsonite Boulevard become Middle Tennessee, but if you've lived here long enough, you still call it Samsonite. I think your concern with the traffic and the speed of the traffic coming through is something that could be addressed. Going along with what Kathy said, is if there's some way that you can slow that traffic down, I think it's a good idea to do it. If there were a roundabout, and we seem to be going more and more that direction in Murfreesboro because it serves multiple reasons. But if you were to put a roundabout at where these roads conjunct, you're going to slow the traffic down, and you've also got three roads coming together at that point, so it wouldn't be that hard for the police department, fire department to understand that that is an intersection. So I think that a roundabout would solve the problem of not only slowing traffic down, but it would resolve the problem of having to rename the roads. So that would be my suggestion.
Is that feasible, Mr. Blomley?
We have the plans for Hillwood, the master plan, the master zoning plan was approved. They have that land use entitlement to develop in accordance with the approved plan. They've had a preliminary plat approved for one of the sections that's going to extend Barwood Drive. I don't know that because of the street naming issue that we could compel the developer of that subdivision to incur additional expense in constructing a roundabout, which could potentially impact his lot yield for his plan that already has a zoning entitlement.
I would agree with Mr. Blomley that that is an approved master plan and has been approved, and I don't see how this issue would allow the Plan Commission to require us or require the developer to go back and have to have additional cost. And I would also like to say that Mr. Blomley has been addressing a large part of our city for 10 years.
About 9 years.
9 years, and he does an excellent job. And this does happen from time to time. It is unfortunate, but we don't take it lightly. And as our chairman has stated earlier, that sometimes when we have a vacant property in the middle and it's time and some time between or between city county when they develop, unfortunately, we do from time to time run into this situation. Again, we don't take it lightly. We try to minimize the impact, but I don't see us being able to go back and require the developer to go back and put a roundabout in. Mr. Ives may.
Yeah, my concern's more for the speeding aspect and slowing traffic down than it is the name of the road. I'll be honest with you. But I do think that would address a traffic concern, which I think really far outweighs the name of the road. But
well, that's kind of a moot point at this point.
Okay.
But so we really did this 5 years ago. In 2010 is what you're saying.
When we're at Hillwood.
But in 2010, we didn't. It wasn't connected over here somewhere when we approved this part in the middle?
Well, the part in the middle was the master zoning plan for the Hillwood subdivision. And initially, Barwood was going to tee into Miranda Drive, which was the plan that was approved in 2008, meaning that this would be a non-issue. But when the master plan for Hillwood changed, this has ended up being an unintended consequence of the new street layout. And so, but yeah, this was.
And so basically, though, but we missed that. We allowed that modification to the master plan in that middle section, and we missed that.
Yeah, I would say
I'm going to say.
Yeah, it's something that is a direct result of that plan approval. One thing that probably the most recent change that we've had affected less homeowners, but last year we did a street renaming for a portion of Community Circle in the Kimbrough Woods subdivision to Jerry Anderson Drive. Great ceremony, by the way, honoring Mr. Anderson. I learned a lot about him. It was something that I was really proud to be a part of. He seemed like a wonderful man. But it was a public safety issue that our fire department had identified to where the street pattern was no longer going to support that street name, and it was going to cause confusion. They brought that to our attention. We brought this particular issue to their attention. But as I said before, we take very seriously their concerns. And that was brought to us because they actually had delays in response time based on the fact that there was confusion about the street name. And so we're trying to kind of prevent that from happening in the first place and be proactive in this situation.
We are now, and I understand, and I have no problem with us renaming streets, and we've been renaming streets for this whole time. But I hate that we're having to do this one for this reason. But it's got to be. If this has to be, then we don't have any. I think we messed up.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Not me.
I don't like it either, but the fact that Miranda is in the county and we have no control over what the county does, we have to take control over
So
what.
did we approve this or not?
We approved it. The plan changed. Hillwood. The plan changed.
That is in the city.
Yes. So.
We did that.
We did that. But if you look at what happened, you had a development on this end and a development on this end, and you had a lot in the middle that was not platted out.
Wide open.
Wide open. Mm-hmm. So, we can't just change it to Miranda because Miranda's in the county. Well, I haven't.
Wait a minute. Yeah. Well, no, we're not getting into a debate here. Mr. Young?
I move for approval.
Motion's made. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
One no vote. Motion carries. Any further business, Mr. Whitaker?
Yes, Chairman, I had informed the Plan Commission that we were going to have basically a neighborhood meeting for the training.
1 second. Folks, this will go to the city council for ratification, so it's not a final deal until the city council approves it, okay?
So it'll be like a similar hearing, kind of like this?
It will not be a public hearing, but you can contact the city council members.
I don't think.
It has to be ratified, he said, by city council.
Traditionally, we've done that.
I thought street renaming was the province of the planning commission. I don't believe it goes to council. I'm not 100% sure that. You may know the book better than I do, Matthew.
Well, I believe you're correct. It is the province of the Planning Commission. I think traditionally, as a courtesy, we brought it to City Council.
But not with a public hearing.
No, not with a public hearing.
Not with a public hearing, but to council for their ratification.
Ratification, that's correct.
That's what I was trying to get to. So you can talk to the city councilman. We have 2 here tonight, but the mayor and the city council will be hearing this again, okay? Thank you very much. Mr. Whitaker, please proceed. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
As I was stating, I informed the Plan Commission that we were going to have a neighborhood meeting for the training facility that would be constructed on the Coleman Farm. We were going to have that on the 11th. That has actually changed. There was a conflict. That will move to 6 o'clock at Walter Hill School on the 18th. And again, as a neighborhood meeting for the training facility site.
Okay.
Other than that, Mr. Blomley, do you have anything?
I have nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Blomley.
I have nothing.
There's no further business. We stand adjourned.
Is that a